Yeah, today we're going to talk about creating great products. Like, if a product is great, how much marketing do you need? Word of mouth versus direct marketing or advertising, brand marketing. So, yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah, I think some of it kind of stemmed from just some conversations that we listen to on other podcasts and things like that about whether or not you need marketing in the traditional, like, tradition. What does that mean
Right.
anymore? Right. Like, we're not talking about billboards, but it's like just the amount of ads on, social media and all these types of things, and whether or not you need to do that or versus referral and word of mouth and other forms of advertising. So what's your thoughts on that?
I think it really depends on what your intention is, like what you're selling, what your services are, because somebody has to find out about you in some
Right.
way, shape, or form. Right. You can't just be like, I've got a great thing here. I'll wait for people to come to me.
Right.
But I do think people need to be intentional about identifying their audience and what benefit or what solution they're trying to solve. So, like, you can't make something that is going to be beneficial for everybody and expect it to be successful, because people aren't monolithic. Like, you and I have a lot of similarities and we have a lot of differences. So,
Sure.
like, creating a product and being like, oh, this is for everybody is not accurate. Even if you shout it to the masses, like, it's not going to go anywhere. So I think that's kind of the first thing you have to identify is, okay, who's this for and how do they consume information?
Yeah. Who's your audience for sure?
Yeah.
And I mean, we talked about that, that's just like you said, we have a lot of things in common and things that are different. That's kind of, one of the things that I think is always a challenge in marketing and defining audiences and where they're at is like, people are not one dimensional. Like, just because, like, I say like to play chess doesn't mean I also don't like to lift heavy, right? Or I don't, whatever that is, right? Like, there's aspects of, like, and the point being is, like, that's part of the reason where even though we talk about audiences, like, I feel like there is some, we talk about this all the time when we're talking about advertising and the channels that we're going to choose. But the reality is like there's some, granted, there's probably a larger cluster of certain people within certain boundaries, right? But that doesn't mean your entire audience is going to be caught in one of these things. And I think it'd be wrong to think that that certain things will be completely useless because of who you determine your audience is. I mean, give or take, right? Like,
Right.
obviously, there's probably, probably right after you say that, you think of like a million examples where that's not the case. But, there's probably definitely things where it's like, well, they definitely won't be here. But,
Yeah.
but I think that there's, when we're talking about advertising channels specifically, like, there's probably opportunity in each one of them if you really think about how those tools are meant to be used. And I always think that that's kind of the bigger challenge that people have. It's like, hey, I'm going to do a bunch of words and throw it on Instagram. Like,
Yeah.
all right, like, you like, you don't understand what you use Instagram for.
Yeah.
It's those kind of things that I think at times where that's the bigger hurdle, is like trying to recognize what the platform is intended use is, and then not trying to, like, break it with your
Right.
version of what you're trying to tell people or get in front of them.
I think that's, the crux of marketing as a whole. Like, what you're talking about is, trying to force feed a specific type of creative or writing style or whatever into a channel that it's not meant for.
Right.
And I think that's the trouble that marketers get into as a whole, is you're trying to take a product or a service or a brand and you're trying to put it in a position where it doesn't belong. And I think that's what separates good marketers from great marketers. Is like, okay, maybe this product doesn't need to be on this platform at all.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need to discuss it in this way at all. And I think one of the traits that I notice in good marketers, and one of the reasons marketing agencies are often a lot of fun to work at, is that marketers are able to have empathy because they have to be able to connect with so many different people.
Mm-hmm.
So they usually know a bunch about a lot of different things, and they can connect with a bunch of things because you have to be able to put yourself into that audience that you're trying to attract and find out what fits them. So, like, marketers largely, even if they're not the friendliest person, often have people gravitate to them or have, like, a lot of friends or, like, know a lot of people because they're able to connect quickly. And I think that's something that, you can see, at different agencies. And that's what separates good marketers and great marketers, in my opinion, is not even marketing. Like, you are always marketing yourself. And so you can be like, oh, like this person who, I've only known for 10 minutes, I feel like I've known him my whole life,
Sure.
probably would be a decent marketer.
No, that's interesting. I think of, I think that's a big part of it. And there's almost a advantage, sometimes, I think, in the sense where when you're so immersed in what you do, right? Like there is definitely value in like having a background in certain things or certain ideas, so that as they're sharing, when I think about this, how do we define the audience, and then how do we find them, and then make sure that they consume the stuff that we want them to consume. And because one of the things that we say all the time, right, is meeting people where they are. And that's one of the things that it tends to be, like if you're reasonably knowledgeable about a reasonable amount of things, like you're probably a reasonable audience member. You're in
Right.
some sort of, you're a version of their audience, right? So a lot of times where people are so passionate about what it is that they're selling and they're immersed in it and they believe it, and you're just like, no, we get it. And people like you already know about your brand because they're seeking you out because they already know. The people that we're always trying to figure out like who we're going to talk to, or that is everybody else. Like, what are we here for? And one of the other things that brings up that I think is always part of the challenge with, just marketing in general and some of the ideas, like it's like I think of the startup world and like a lot of the companies that we work with, where it's like they're just now kind of getting started and budgets are small, and they're like, how do I, but I need to get so many customers in order to make this a profitable business. So how do I do that? And how do I do that effectively? And I think that that's where some of the frustration when I hear people talk about audiences or how we're going to do it, or, yeah, you could just do this. Like,
Yeah.
if I was Nike, I could just do whatever I want. You're like, yeah, no shit. Like they already did what they were, they're already there. Like,
Yeah.
great. Like, we're talking about the guy that's just getting started and what they're trying to get going. Or you're in a market I think about like the apartment industry, right? Like, I just went to that conference, so it's on my mind, but it's like, how you're trying to differentiate, like, between this one versus the one across the street that's, similar or cheaper or slightly, becomes about pricing or becomes about an amenity or two, and these types of things. And just how do you, again, get the right audience and make sure you get the right amount of, people in your store or in your door versus somewhere else. But you're right. I think, from when it comes to audience, I do think that from a marketing perspective, it is important for you to have kind of, be curious about a lot of things. I mean, I think that helps a lot because, unless you're very verticalized, you're probably, you gotta think through a lot of different challenges. But that goes back to the fact that the audiences aren't one dimensional.
Right.
So
Yeah. Like, I think with word of mouth and like you said, the small businesses that we're starting with, a lot of people have that idea of like, I have to hit this number, right? And whatever that number is, like, we got to get this many people. I would like for our audience, our clients, people in general who are starting that, to also work on the other side of like, okay, I need this many people. Does my product or service have enough value to have that many people?
right.
Because you also need to think about the people you don't want. Like, a lot of people don't necessarily want to say no. They don't think that way, but it's like, you need to be like, no, this isn't for you. Like, I didn't make this so that your type of people, whatever those psychographics are, like whatever your thoughts are, whatever your beliefs are, like, this isn't for you. Like, we're talking about apartments, like a high rise in downtown San Diego
Right.
isn't for everybody. It's like, well, that's so expensive. I would never pay that. It's like, good. It's not for you. Like,
Right.
we don't want you to think that this is a burden or that this is, not worth everything. And that's kind of, with all the luxury items, you can see that like luxury items have a much easier time of pitching it that way. Like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, this isn't for you. We didn't make, Elon Musk didn't care about people in the middle of America who make 60,000 a year when he built the Cybertruck. Like, it wasn't for them. Like,
Right.
they're never going to use it,
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
but when you think about things that are commoditized at a much smaller price point, and they're like, we got to sell 20,000 of these
Mhm.
to, break even. Then you get into, okay, well, like this has to be for everybody. Like, no, it's still not for everybody. Crest
Yeah,
toothpaste doesn't have to be for everybody.
sure.
Now, probably is. Everybody should brush their teeth in theory.
Right, right.
Um,
No, in reality.
but like, there has to be like a difference between like who's buying Crest and who's buying Colgate,
Sure.
right?
Well, and I think though, that goes to the TAM aspect, right? Like the addressable market you're kind of talking about there. So it's like, yeah, like everybody who has teeth, so now I think it lends itself to having a large enough thing, but if you're, like a local rental company that, rents, different, tools and equipment, right? There's only people are only going to come from so far. Your addressable market is only so big, and it's people that are do-it-yourselfers with like some amount of like technical acumen, if you will, around like how to operate heavy machinery and feel confident that they're going to be able to do it themselves and a
Right.
good enough job. So like that's a different than like
Yeah.
say Crest. It's like if you have teeth, we should think about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think those are, you're right though. I think, it is interesting to kind of think through, what is your market and what does that look like? And what's funny too, is because some of the things as you talk about them that I think about is like, where does marketing start and stop and sales
Mhm.
begin and end, right? Like, because, that's always one of there's some thought, around conversion through marketing. And if the model makes sense, like then, people all the time click a button to buy now,
Yeah.
right? I mean, um, so there's some amount of, there's not a salesperson that's standing in the middle of those things. And that's one of the other things I think that's interesting to think about is like, what is your, um, who is your audience and what type of sale is it? Is it a technical sale? Is it
Yep.
something that needs some amount of conversation, or is it something like a product where it's like, you just need enough information and the price point's cheap enough that people will take the risk on it, right? Or there's enough reviews, or it's very specifically like, I need an air tag that fits this specific thing and this is the holder for it. Like, I mean, it's like, all right, like that's not overly complex. So I think that's the other piece, the kind of, each one of them has their own, like, hey, here's where we're not gonna, if you have a technical product, we're only going to get you so far. Like, we're just going to get people curious enough to knock on the door, if you will, and leave a message or try to get a demo or do one of those things. We're not in that case, also the salesperson, but then if it is like more of an e-commerce business or something along those lines, there's probably a little bit more of the, you try to get all of the information this person needs. How big is this thing? Can it hold all the stuff that I need? Like, does it fit in the place that I want to put it? Is there enough like, either belief in the brand or belief in the reviews or, word of mouth or whatever to kind of get me to be like, yeah, it's good enough.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to buy this thing, and then Amazon's good about taking it back if I don't want it, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, like the word of mouth like is interesting to me as like a like a starting point, right? Because it's you have like a known, hey, this is my audience. I'm gonna make sure that I get my product to them, and they're gonna take it and run with it because you see a lot, especially now with social media. Like you've got reviews, like that's word of mouth. You've got reviews and testimonials, generally the same thing. But you have referral sources where it's like, oh, hey, my friend likes this. I'm going to refer him to, X person or X business. And you can launch that way. And I think that's how most businesses kind of get started is you're doing something that you're really passionate about, that you like a lot. Somebody else sees it. They're like, oh, can you do that for me? Whether it's making clothes, whether it's, uh, Uber seems like probably a word of mouth type of thing where it's like, yeah, what would be nice is if I could just call a buddy and they could pick me up from the bar and
Yeah.
drive me home.
Sure.
And then they were like, yeah, that does make sense. Let's have a network of like 6 guys who are like, we're not going out tonight. So like, if any of you guys need us, give us a call. We'll pick you up. I don't know if that's how Uber started. I could probably
Yeah, there's probably,
research that.
yeah,
But,
yeah,
I mean, I think that's where the idea of like, word of mouth is the way to start kind of comes from, is like ideas usually start that way between a couple of
sure.
people. You read all about all the Fortune 500 companies that started in a garage. Where it's like,
Well, and I think you're totally right. And it's interesting because there's, depending on what you're talking about, there's this aspect of like, are you creating something that's new and unique that nobody's done?
mhm.
Or are you, got so fed up with the customer service with respect to taxis that you were just like, we need a better system, right?
Yeah.
So that's like, then, and I think about that as a marketer when we talk about, that's where meeting people where they are, right? Like if you're aware of taxis, then you can focus on the differentiators of your thing. If you're the first one to bring, computers to market or something, totally new,
Right.
it's a different sales aspect. It's a different marketing, solution that you have to consider and what you focus on. And like you said, like I think earlier, this is always the challenges. Like the best thing doesn't always win, unfortunately,
Yep.
because of either lack of marketing or lack of sales or, so lack of awareness. So I see this, we just as at Apartmentalize, the National Association of Apartments conference in Vegas. And like the thing, there's so many of these products there and you see this aspect of like, there's a lot of people and they get backed by good PE firms or whatever it is. So they get a big sales team and they can put out a lot of information and their product's not that good by comparison,
Yeah.
like people, there's a belief that like once you hit a certain size, like surely it must be pretty good. They have an engineering team that's like 100 people deep, right? Like, so yeah, it must be, but it's like, like
Yeah.
you see that all the time with just these, you know, just just monoliths of
I
like
think
things.
of like Apple as that case. I mean,
Sure.
somebody who's holding an iPhone over there,
Yeah, yeah.
Apple computer. I'm not saying Apple doesn't have great technology. They
Sure.
do. But I think most people who have cell phones would agree that the iPhone's probably not the best at everything. It's a great phone. Love
Sure.
my iPhone. It's very easy to use. But like from a technology standpoint, my friends who have Samsungs or, use Android devices are like, well, this came out for Android 3 years ago.
Sure.
It did this. I'm like, yeah, I don't care. Like that's not
Yeah.
why I
I don't
bought
care
this
because
phone.
it doesn't connect to my 800 other Apple
Yeah,
products
like-
that easily. But yeah, you're right.
It's like, the technology is not the best per se, which is, the best person doesn't always win. Apple has a much smaller market share overall than Android in the phone space.
Sure.
Like the brand recognition is nowhere near as close because it's a singular, I think it being a singular phone instead of having 75 different variations. I mean, you have the different generations or whatever, but they found a way to make their above average product exclusive and elite.
Yeah.
And sometimes that is better than making the product significantly better.
Sure.
Like we've made it so that it has exclusivity, which is better than the product being great. Like it's just,
As it turns out, at
Yeah.
least, for the time being, like,
Yeah,
let's
exactly.
see once it gets disrupted. But you're right. I mean, those are the opportunities, but I don't want to, and I think all of that to say, like, to come back to kind of the point of like, who's your audience and how do we target them? I think that, these are all those questions and it's what people are asking all the time. It's what we're asked to figure out all the time. And that kind of comes back to that, like, we are really good guessers, like we can get a pretty good idea and there's a lot of information, a lot of tools, a lot of, markets that are similar and things like this. But at the end of the day, like there is this aspect of, testing and trying new things and then iterating on it over and over again. And yeah, I mean, I think, we're surprised on not to say our guessing is bad, but I think like from the perspective of certain channels being, finding our audience in places we didn't expect them. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time where it was like, hey man, like here I'm thinking Instagram or, Google's the better spot. And then like the Facebook's blowing up and you're like, man, who's on Facebook? Right. Like it's just funny how, your world of what, what you're used to seeing, hearing people mention that they're using TikTok for search is just like, to me is just like and I don't know, like I get that, I'm a Generation Xer. I'm not like in the same like mentality, but there's just like, like, man, Google's been doing this a long time, like what are you talking about? Like even if you said Bing, I'd be like, okay, but yeah, that's, it's interesting.
Yeah. I think like you were saying, like that goes back into not necessarily traditional versus where we are now in marketing, but like traditionally for marketing, people only had like demographics to go off, right? Like they were breaking everything out by channel and they were talking about like the channels individually between Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and Google and Reddit and everywhere else you can market and place
Sure.
ads. And then they're like, okay, well, we know the person that we want to target is this tall, they make this much money, they live in this area, they do this. And we're finding out more and more as we collect more data as marketers that like, yeah, that stuff matters to a degree. But what matters more is like how they perceive the world. What are their interests and what do they believe? Because we know that that's going to connect more deeply. If you're like, hey, I can tap into like this person feels really strongly about their diet and like what they should eat and how they, their lifestyle and what they should be doing. So if I can tap into those experiences, that's going to be a much stronger advertising or marketing play for them.
For sure.
And, it's the same with like the channels, like, oh yeah, this one's not working really well. Well, before you would have to make, pause budget over here, move it over here. Like I can't run any more TV commercials. This billboard needs to come down. We had to sign a 6-month contract. So it'll be up there, but now we got to get to radio and we have to do this. Now you can use, programmatic buying and it'll just flip based on performance and everything that we're seeing. So, I think the continued growth of data, and we've even been talking about, the speed of information and how quickly things are changing between, week over week, day over day. There seems to be another announcement.
I know. By the time this gets out, it'll be like it's old.
What are those guys talking about?
Yeah, like what century are they in?
Yeah.
No, exactly. Awesome. Well, that was good. I guess we'll call it.
Yeah.